We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research, and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 23rd of May 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist. I'm Vincent McAviney. Coming up.
The Golden Dome for America is a game changer. It's a generational investment in the security of America and Americans.
It's big, technically ambitious, and expensive, but will the Golden Dome actually protect America? Then to the beaches of Rio, as the local mayor cracks down. Will new rules spoil the party atmosphere? And we'll head to Mexico to check in with our roaming correspondent, Claudia Jacob. What's on your radar, Claudia?
I'll tell you about Mexico's fashionable rebrand and why low-alcohol alternatives to tequila are on the rise.
Plus, we'll leaf through the day's papers and get the latest theatre news too. That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. The suspect accused of gunning down 2 Israeli embassy staff members outside a Jewish museum in Washington, D.C., has been charged with first-degree murder. Denmark has voted to raise its retirement age to 70 by 2040, the highest level in Europe. And Charlie XCX was named Songwriter of the Year at the Ivor Novello Awards in London. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. But first, France and Saudi Arabia are reportedly working on a proposal to disarm Hamas in order to transform it into a political entity which could play a role in the future governance of Palestine. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Florence Biederman, journalist and political analyst, and by Monocle's Middle East correspondent Leila Malala Allen. Florence, if I can come to you first, what do we know about this proposal?
Well, it's actually not only a France and Saudi Arabia proposal. This is kind of a plan that was put forward by Arab League member states a while ago that was trying to find a solution to the war in Gaza and the end of the conflict by disarming Hamas, establishing kind of a civil governance in Gaza. And maybe with the revitalized Palestinian Authority playing a role in it. So even if it's an Arab League plan, I mean, France and Saudi Arabia have taken kind of an initiative. They are co-chairing a conference in New York in June about the whole plan and how to end this conflict. So that's when it will be discussed, and Emmanuel Macron has taken kind of a lead in this, and that's what is behind the whole plan.
And Leila, do we have any more specifics about how this will operate, and what's the feeling in the region around it?
We don't at all yet. And that's kind of essentially the idea is to try and tackle the main sticking point at the moment over bringing the war in Gaza to an end, which is that Benjamin Netanyahu's government says the only way that they will stop the war in Gaza is both to have Hamas completely disarmed and all the leaders out of the Gaza Strip. So what this initiative basically is trying to do is to kind of find a middle ground where Hamas leaders would still be able to be politically powerful and politically involved and move more towards being, what they were sort of supposed to be 20 years ago, a government inside Gaza, while not being armed, because there is that insistence that there can't be any more weaponry. Now, the problem here is that it might be too little too late. The problem now is that Benjamin Netanyahu's government, in the last few weeks, since they have launched this new offensive, Gideon's Chariots, in the Gaza Strip, is that they're now saying they will never leave Gaza. They will continue to have security coordination over Gaza. They want to be running aid inside Gaza in the future. All conditions that the international community is extremely concerned about and has expressed outrage about. So the problem is, as I say, that many kind of international actors are concerned that this might now be too late. And while this might have been the solution maybe 6 months ago, now the negotiating factors are completely different, and Israel doesn't really seem interested in engaging in such a proposal, especially when it still won't be discussed even until this conference. And the other thing is that right now Benjamin Netanyahu is pretty hostile towards France and its allies on this, because of course Emmanuel Macron has been saying that the other thing he wants to do at this conference is try and get as many international leaders as possible to recognize a Palestinian state. He says his reason for doing that is to try and get the states that don't currently recognize Israel to do so in return, so that two legitimate states can be negotiating with each other and hopefully put both in more of a position to reach a peaceful conclusion to this war.
And Florence, I mean, the much talked about idea of statehood for Palestine, where are the French people on that?
Well, I mean, it has been a decade, since France and French presidents, including the previous president, François Hollande, said they would recognize a Palestinian state. So what Macron has been saying recently is that you have to wait for the right moment. You have to wait so that it's been made in the frame of a two-state solution. The problem is that obviously, and he said it openly, Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't want a two-state solution. This is still kind of an idea to which, like, the international community cling to when they want to resolve the war in Gaza. But this is not what the present Israeli government has in mind. So whatever the solution offered, you really can't see very well how this initiative can lead to any kind of progress. And again, it's not even sure that France will recognize the Palestinian state during this conference in June. It's something that, it has been said that there would be also kind of an exchange, like with Saudi Arabia and other countries, recognizing Israel in exchange. But in the present situation, you really cannot see how on both sides, this could really happen as soon as June.
And I mean, in the region, Leila, how much would it be a game changer if powers like France, gave recognition to Palestine? Would it sort of bolster ties, do you think, between, Europe and the Middle East?
So it's not so much about these leaders giving recognition to a Palestinian state. It's about these leaders coming into the same kind of line of thinking as their Arab allies, which is that the only solution to this going forward is for Palestinians to have their own state. Once that is the negotiating ground, once you have some Western nations who are often spearheading negotiations in this conflict saying this is what we want to move towards, you've then got a very different playing field, both for the Israeli government and for Palestinians, who currently don't really have anything to negotiate with except the fact that they are under an occupying power. They don't really have any power of their own. So it certainly would be a game changer in that way. The other way in which it would be, of course, is the feeling of so many in the region that the Palestinian people, in general, for decades, but particularly over the last year and a half, have been completely left at the mercy, essentially, of international political attitudes towards Benjamin Netanyahu and his government, and have been dying really sort of silently as a result. The reaction when finally this week we saw this joint statement from Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron and Mark Carney in Canada saying that, We've reached a point where the actions of the Israeli government are unacceptable, where people are starving in Gaza, where food is being used as a weapon, and where the Israeli government is sponsoring the actions of violent settlers in the West Bank, and they want to impose harsh conditions and potentially even sanctions on the Israeli government if this doesn't stop, really was sort of a game changer. And many people in the region feel that finally something is being done to stop what almost everyone in these countries feels is now a completely disproportionate reaction to the horrific attacks on October 7th, 2023, with so many deaths, the entire Gaza Strip essentially ravaged, and now, people on the brink of starvation, with the Israeli government completely in charge of the aid that's been coming into the country, which of course none has for 3 months. They finally let a few trucks in the last couple of days under immense international pressure. So the tide does seem to be changing on that, and that would certainly be very positive in terms of those relationships with Arab nations.
And Florence, it does feel like there is a solidifying of public mood here in the UK in sort of strong now feeling of condemnation towards Israel over this latest offensive. Is it the same in France? And this reaction from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he said that Starmer, Macron and canny are siding with mass murderers, rapists, baby killers and kidnappers. The statement they put out was strong, but it's been seen as being quite delayed. Is that the feeling in France as well?
Well, yes, the opinion here is divided, like in many other countries. Like you see a demonstration of support for Palestinians. By the way, less and less, and not that strong right now. There is also the reaction of the Jewish community, and the government is trying to condemn Israel but not support Hamas. It's kind of a difficult game for everybody. That was the communique with the canny and Starmer was the strongest, and France and President Macron have been recently making more and more declarations, like condemning the war, the fact that Israel doesn't stop this war. There is this feeling that we reached an unbearable point, that the situation is unbearable. And he said also that when Macron visited the region recently, he was really impressed by the level of destruction and the humanitarian situation in Gaza. When you come near to the situation on the ground, then you realize more what it is. But all this being said, like what can they do, and what is their way of acting to contribute to stop the war? This is what this conference in June will try to do, maybe, but with little hope anyway.
Florence Biedermann and later Milana Allen there. Thank you very much. This is The Globalist. It's 7:12 here in London, 2:12 in Washington, D.C. Well, earlier this week, Donald Trump announced the US had selected a design for its version of Israel's Iron Dome missile defense shield, christened, what else by this president, the Golden Dome. He claims it will be ready by the end of his term. If that is, as the Constitution says, in 4 years' time, that's an incredibly fast rollout for such an ambitious project, which will cost hundreds of billions of dollars. Well, to discuss the tech, I'm joined now by Thomas A. Nagy, a senior research fellow for nuclear, space and missile defense at the Future of Security program of GlobeSec. Thomas, thank you for joining us. So is this like Reagan's Star Wars program, or is Golden Dome actually a possibility on this continental scale?
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for having me. I would say there is a certain kind of historical reference to what the Reagan administration was trying to do, which ultimately was a failure in the end because of the financial and technological considerations. The way how the current US administration looks at it is that it might be financially viable because of the progress that have been done on the side of the technologies in the past 2 generations. But obviously, some of the announcements that we have heard from President Trump on Tuesday, claiming that the intent is to have a system that would provide a strategic air missile defense at the success rate of, that is very close to 100%, or having a system that would, in the end, forever ending the missile threat to the American homeland. These are really, really ambitious goals that are not entirely consistent with the current state of affairs when it comes to strategic missile defense technologies. But also at the same time, you need to admit that there is some merit in the ambition, because the way how currently the U.S. protects its homelands is clearly insufficient. It provides some kind of layer of protection against a notional North Korean ballistic missile threats. But what we are seeing at the same time is that both China and Russia are producing and developing a large amount of land attack cruise missiles that are able to operate on long ranges from the sea, from the air. And at the same time, we are seeing also significant progress that the mentioned North Korea has been accomplished in the past 10 years. So obviously, from the U.S. perspective, the arms race is already happening. And for them, currently they are in a quest for a recipe how to address it. Some part of it goes to will go to actually enhancing nuclear forces, but obviously the ambition is to do something on the defense side, and that's the Golden Dome is actually a materialization of that ambition.
And just to explain, I mean, how will this tech actually work, and what is the level of weapon that it could protect the US from? I mean, you've mentioned sort of cruise missiles and things there, but could it go up to protecting from nuclear ICBMs?
Well, the U.S. currently has a system that has that very ambition, but it's a land-based system that intends to neutralize ICBMs in space in mid-course phase. So this new ambition is to look at the possibility to neutralize missiles in what we call the boost phase. So when they are launched, which is at some point very tempting way, because when a ICBM is launched, it leaves a huge thermic footprint and it moves up in the atmosphere in a very static vector. So it's an ideal object to shoot at because you can see it, you can collect huge amounts of data. It's not really able to maneuver. So it doesn't matter how advanced missile it is, in a boost phase, it's extremely vulnerable. So that's the positive side of the thinking. The negative side is obviously you need to field either a terrestrial missile defense system, which is extremely quick and which can react instantaneously, and is very close to the source of the threat, which is for all sorts of reasons very difficult to do, especially in kind of countries like Russia and China, which are big countries, territorially speaking. Or the other way is that you create interceptors in the space, so they wait for the missiles to ascend towards the space, and then they neutralize them, which is difficult to do because A, you don't have the technology today. Two, you need to have a constellation of satellites, which is huge compared to that, anything that has been ever developed on Earth. Frankly speaking, we don't have the technology today. We might have a hope to be close to that kind of technology, but we are certainly not at that point. That's also the reason why no country has actually seriously attempted to do anything at dimension scale.
And I mean, just physically, if we're talking about this, so I'm imagining that the focus of the defense is coming from the west of the United States, not so much the east of the United States in terms of, where Russia, China, North Korea might fire from. So the US, the Pacific Ocean is pretty large. That gives it an advantage time-wise and maybe tracking it, seeing it coming. But the US has, lots of islands, territory in that region. It's got obviously Hawaii as well. Could we see sort of physical batteries and stations being kind of erected all across those islands and on the sort of west coast of the US?
Well, I think inherently the US will need to prioritize what it aims to defend primarily. You cannot really defend the entirety of the continental United States, and you cannot really defend everything that is part of the US territory because it's simply too huge, at least today. Looking at the specific vectors, I subscribe to the notion that West is a priority, but also North. So if you are looking at the threats from Russia, actually the shortest trajectory for a missile to reach the US is not from the east, it's actually from north. But Russia has been also developing missiles that have huge ranges that can travel even that can reach the US even from south. So on the long run, if you look at the future, and this is supposed to be a project for a generation, President Trump has mentioned the 3 years delivery. That's probably the most unrealistic part of the whole endeavor. This is much more likely to bear fruition maybe in 10 years or 20 years if things go right and if it will be eventually affordable. By that time, we will also have probably missiles that will have a significant reach and that would be able to pose a threat from all sorts of directions. But you mentioned correctly that this needs to be an endeavor that integrates both existing systems, but probably in larger numbers, and also developing a new layer of protection. And I think, where it gets really controversial is whether you're going to place or intend to place interceptors in space. That's the controversial element. The fact that the space domain is going to be used more heavily for, tracking missiles, command and control, transmitting data, I think that's fairly uncontroversial. And that would be supported politically and also in the expert community across the board. What's really making this whole endeavor such a big, ambition and question mark is really whether you would put kinetic or non-kinetic interceptors in space. And obviously, the current administration wants to seek a potential avenue to do that.
Thomas A. Nagy, thank you. Still to come on the programme.
We learned again, for some scarcely imaginable reason, Trump had become strangely fixated on one particular demographic.
Andrew Muller's weekly news roundup. This is The Globalist.
Craft is its own reward, which is why at UBS we're honoured to work alongside over 50 of today's leading Nobel laureates, each an expert in the art of economic science, bringing you engaging discussions, actionable insights, and inspired solutions, all focused around the questions that shape our world today. For a better outlook, find a Nobel perspective. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Well, let's continue now with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio is Latika Book, a writer-at-large for the Australian news publication The Nightly. Latika, good to have you back. Firstly, anyone around the world wanting to go to Harvard might have some trouble.
Yeah, this story broke overnight, and taking you, Vinny, to the New York Times, which first broke this, and it extracted or obtained a letter from the Trump administration telling Harvard that they were revoking the certificate that enables it to hire foreign or international students. Let's just pause for a minute. This is Harvard. This is not some two-bit university in the back of Whoop Whoop trying to raise some money from international students. This is the oldest, most prestigious university, not just in America, but probably the most prestigious one in the world. And it has been banned from attracting the brightest and the best from around the world, which has always been one of its calling cards. Now, this comes... it is an escalation of a very long-running and intense feud between the Trump administration and Harvard administration. So what this relates to is essentially the Trump administration trying to crack down on the pro-Palestinian protests on student campuses. And they have been demanding information from Harvard about the identity of students who took part in these protests, particularly if they are foreigners, what they're studying, maybe what their political views have been expressed. Now, Harvard has been resisting this, and it has told its students that we are only going to comply with the Trump administration's directives as much as they pertain to law, i.e. we won't give any more information about you than we don't have to. Now, that has really irked the administration's fury, and that has triggered this letter from Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, to Harvard saying that effective immediately, she is revoking the international student certification. So that means students currently enrolled in Harvard are affected by this. Students preparing to go to Harvard are affected by this. All of a sudden, you have countries around the world and students around the world being drawn into this domestic feud. And of course, many keep in mind, this is set against the backdrop of a broader ideological battle between the right and the left, and the right believing that the left have marched through these institutions and have taken hold of universities for decades now.
But I thought they were meant to be free speech absolutists. I mean, what's the problem? But I mean, this is, this we're at the end of an academic year, so we're seeing, what in the US they call it commencements, don't they? The sort of graduation ceremonies now. But there will be potentially thousands, if not tens of thousands of people who've worked incredibly hard around the world, who are at the pioneering edge of their field, whether that be science or medicine, whatever it is, research, who have planned their life around going to this university and paying a lot of money to go to this university come the autumn. And their plans now are in tatters, effectively.
Yeah, I think most people would be in a holding pattern situation, Vinny, because we know that the Trump administration does escalate, often with the view of backing down and retreating. And I think that will be the position of a lot of people. Either way, Harvard has said it's taking this directive to court. So we will see this unfold in legal battles. But I think diplomatically, this is going to be a very fascinating test because you'll see governments in Europe waking up this morning to this news. They will have constituents directly affected by this. Already in Australia, which was awake when this was happening, the lead story in Australia is the Australian ambassador having to deal now with all these international students. This is no small fry. There's a lot of people who are caught up with this.
And it ties into our next story about US applications for UK citizenship on the rise after the Trump re-election. I mean, if you are Harvard in Cambridge and Oxford this morning, you are thinking, well, which of these great students from around the world can we poach off? And I'm sure elite universities around the world will think the same.
Indeed. Well, it's a funny old world because you have a lot of Western countries, including the British, I might add, talking very savagely about migrants. But maybe not so much when it comes to Americans, because the applications by Americans for British citizenship has hit a record high. Now, the number itself is actually not that much. You might be surprised to know it's only 1,930.
That is not, just yesterday we had net migration figures, which were about 430,000.
Correct.
100,000, I think. 430,000. I think. So, yeah, that is a tiny amount of.
It's not even a drop in that metaphorical ocean, is it? But that's in the first 3 months of 2025. But why that's significant? Because, I'm going to show you this graph, Vinny, and you can see it's.
Oh, yeah, it is soaring.
It is a big thing, right? And
like a meme stock in the pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. And citizenship, as someone who has sought and obtained citizenship in this country myself very recently, it is not an easy thing to do. It's a very expensive exercise, and I don't think you do it.
And it involves
lightly.
a test.
Well, it does.
Well,
it does.
In Britain, yeah.
And I'm not sure how many. No, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say I'm not sure how many Americans would be across the obscure history of Britain, but
start in 1066.
I digress. But I think this does track with what a lot of certainly my US friends have been saying ever since Trump was re-elected. This time it's real. I'm going to do everything I can to get out of the country. I need a job elsewhere. Others are going to the more drastic extreme of seeking citizenship. And the reason I chose this story is because this anecdotally does fit with what a lot of my friends in the United States have been saying to me. And we hear it every time somebody from the political right or left is elected. You hear people from the other side
move
saying,
to Canada.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this happened a lot during the first Trump administration, and people all laughed and said, well, I'd like to see you move from lovely LA to, whatever small town in wherever. And a lot of that didn't happen. But it does look like this time we're seeing a bit of data. And I think it is linked very much to that first story. This time people get the sense that the Trump administration's ideological battle within America is real and is being executed.
And I mean, if they do move over here, I mean, I can't wait for more TikToks about how much better 3-pin plugs are and how we make tea in a mad way with electric kettles. But if they do go down to...
Wait, there's another way to make tea?
They do it in the microwave.
What? Are you serious?
Yeah, they do it in the microwave.
Oh,
Put
my
the
God.
tea bag in with the water and do it in the microwave. It's
oh, my God,
crazy.
what?
It's crazy. Americans seem blown away that we have electric kettles, which are quite rare. Anyway, but if they do go down to the sea, they might be a little surprised by the ocean temperature.
Well, I brought this up because I've just spent 8 weeks in Australia and I was covering the federal election campaign. On the very last weekend, I took myself to the south coast of New South Wales and beautiful beaches. The end of May is normally a very cold time in Australia. I did not expect to step in that water and feel warm, and I did, and I was stunned. Looks like that same effect may be affecting Britain because Britain recorded a record-breaking heat wave, marine heat wave, as reported in the Times this morning, around the west coast and island, and that meant that the the water temperatures were around 17 degrees off the Irish coast. That's about 4 degrees warmer than normal.
Yeah, not too bad for this time of year. Well, we'll see whether those...
We say that, but is it good news or not? I mean,
no, probably not.
Exactly.
No.
This is, of course, the direct result of warming ocean temperatures, which is the result of climate change. And so these heat wave conditions in the marine life, we don't see them and we don't feel them as much, of course, as we do the outside air temperature. But if that is a long-term trend, I mean, get used to warmer beach swimming, perhaps in England.
Well, we'll see what happens. Latika Burke, thank you very much. Here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. The suspect accused of gunning down 2 Israeli embassy staff members outside a Jewish museum in Washington, D.C., has been charged with first-degree murder. 30-year-old Elias Rodriguez from Chicago has also been charged with murder of foreign officials and related firearm charges. Denmark is set to have the highest retirement age in Europe after its parliament adopted a law raising it from 67 to 70 by 2040 for all citizens born after 1971. And Charlie XCX was named Songwriter of the Year at the Ivor Novello Awards in London. Accepting the award, the self-deprecating British brat singer quipped, "I'm hardly Bob Dylan." Stay tuned to Monocle Radio for more headlines throughout the day. Now, for a closer look behind the headlines, here's Monocle's Fernando Augusto Pacheco on the news that Rio de Janeiro's mayor is cracking down on the fun on the city's famous beaches.
Visiting a beach in Rio de Janeiro may never be the same again. A 16-point decree by Rio's mayor, Eduardo Paes, will impose strict rules on the use of public space along the city's famous beaches. Some of its points are well thought through. I do feel deeply aggrieved when I go to the beach and someone has a portable speaker loudly playing bad music at my side. Likewise, e-scooters are rightfully due a curtailing, and restrictions on street-side performances using animals is a cause long overdue. But many of these rulings have gone too far and are ridding Rio of its laid-back charm. To restrict live music from being played in beachside kiosks is just perverse. What would Rio be without its impromptu sessions of samba by the sea? Yet more baffling prohibitions remain. Paes proposes a ban on selling drinks in glass bottles. We Brazilians know the value of an ice-cold beer, and glass is an essential ingredient in that concoction. If you want tapped lager in plastic cups or aluminum cans, you can go to Cornwall. Leave our chopp, a draught beer served in frozen glasses, alone. A similarly joyless new rule is that beach kiosks will no longer be allowed to have their own independent names. So no more catchy shop signs, Paraíso Tropical, which will now solemnly known henceforth as Stall 46. Despite some of these petty decrees, Paes remains a big enthusiast for Rio. The mayor garnered international attention after working hard to welcome big-name stars for free gigs on Copacabana Beach. Madonna in 2024 and Lady Gaga this year, attracting 2.1 million people. He's clearly not opposed to fun, essential when you are mayor of this town. But I prefer to lose a vote than to be an incompetent mayor and have a messed up city, he said recently. It's an admirable claim, but live music and a good drink should be accessible to all. While Gaga garners a bigger crowd, this city is defined by the rhythms of its spontaneous local talents. In a city where beach life is deeply entwined with urban life, striking a balance is important, and tweaks to the rules can be made with community involvement. But Rio is a place where unspoken customs and conventions of the beach create a welcoming environment for all, a great leveler in this vast city. Tinkering with that should therefore be done delicately. Indeed, it's hard to complain when sitting in a deck chair with a cool beer or some iced mate from one of the beach vendors, especially if it's named Beach Please. More restrictions, less independence, and personality will force Brazilian beaches in line with their identikit Australian and American cousins. What next? Will they forbid drinking by the beach too? Meu Deus! From Monocle, I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco.
That was Fernando Augusto Pacheco. For more from Monocle's editors and correspondents, why not sign up to our daily free newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. Now, when you think of Mexican cuisine, you might leap to tacos and quesadillas, but the country is undergoing a culinary rebrand, eschewing stereotypes to become a gastronomic powerhouse. Joining us now from Guadalajara is Monocle writer Claudia Jacob. Claudia, good to have you on the programme. Tell us about this new culinary revolution.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a new thing. It's been sort of gradually happening over the last 20 years. But I think the country, and particularly Mexico City, is trying to sort of reposition its image as, not just this sort of this place that generates a lot of fast food, which I think is often the perception, especially in the US, but also to reposition its image as a powerhouse of elevated cuisine, which makes use of Mexico's really abundant produce, produce that they find within their own borders and that they don't have to rely on the US for. And we're seeing that throughout the Mexico's identity, not just in terms of gastronomy, but also fashion and textiles, spearheaded by fashion designer Carla Fernandez, whose designs have become a bit of a benchmark for the country. So yeah, there's a bit of a rebrand going on, and it's interesting to see it in person.
Yeah, just to unpick some of that. I mean, firstly, on the food, I was in Mexico City myself last year, and I was sort of blown away by how good the cuisine is, and not what I expected at all. I mean, who are the kind of big chefs, or what are the restaurants that you think people should be going to if they're visiting the city?
Yeah, I mean, Enrique Olvera is sort of he's sort of setting the benchmark for Mexican cuisine, not only in Mexico, but also in the US. He has restaurants in Mexico City, Pujol, which is super well known, and also in Oaxaca, but also in LA and New York. And I met with him the other day, and he talked to me about the responsibility of representing Mexico's cuisine, not only in Mexico itself, but beyond its borders. And he relies a lot on ingredients that he finds in Oaxaca, which is sort of known as the main gastronomic destination. And yeah, I think, like you said, I also was surprised at the food here, because I think that the way it's been exported to the US and to the UK is a very different sort of way of looking at Mexican food. It's actually quite simple. It relies on ingredients you find there, and it's very spicy.
Yeah, and it's sort of smaller, more delicate proportions. It's not sort of, the kind of stuff we're used to where it's sort of covered in cheese and avocado and all that. I mean, there's a very much a fast food version of Mexican cuisine. And I was in Oaxaca, and the seafood itself there is incredible, isn't it? That's a much bigger part of Mexican sort of cuisine.
Yeah, it's actually very healthy, which I think actually isn't the perception that I had of it from the UK. I think, Enrique said that people perceive it as just fast food, but really it's not. It's very healthy because it's mostly reliant on fruit and veg that they grow there, and that really they have in abundance. It's something that we're really not used to in the UK. So I think there's a much more nuanced understanding of what authentic Mexican cuisine is. And Enrique Olvera and Elena Regalas, who has a restaurant in Mexico City called Rosetta, are all sort of pioneering that understanding around the world. And I think that's really shifting tourism as well. They're seeing a lot more tourism to Mexico post-pandemic, and I think gastronomy has a lot to do with that.
And looking at the sort of art world there, I went to some great galleries in Mexico City, and there's a real sort of definite style of Mexican painting that you sort of see. Who are the artists that people should look out for?
So the main art city, so obviously Mexico City has a huge art community, but sort of the main art city, which is where I am right now, is Guadalajara. There's a sort of this guy, Jose Noé Suro, who has a ceramics factory called Cerámica Suro. He's really the protagonist of art in Guadalajara. I mean, I met with him this morning, and I met with several other gallerists who sort of all really look up to him. And actually, a lot of them have only come to Guadalajara because of him. He's really encouraged them to come. He's created an infrastructure. He's created artist residencies at his ceramics factory in Guadalajara. And he's also hosted sort of some quite young art fairs in his ceramics factory, and also in his new cultural center, which is called Plataforma, which is where I went this morning. And so Guadalajara is, it's Mexico's second city, and there's really a lot going on here. It's a much more relaxed art scene, away from the big arts capitals where so there's a much more fixed idea of what art is. And I think there's also, an abundance of materials that they can use here. They said to me today, materials here are very cheap. We don't have to go very far, 15 minutes down the road, there's a carpenter who can provide whatever you need. It hardly costs anything. It's not something that I'm used to hearing when I travel around European capitals. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for Guadalajara, and that's just going to increase, I think.
And it is almost the weekend. Lots of people will be perhaps enjoying a tipple in the sunny weather here in London for sure. And the thing that I've come to love after my trip to Mexico is mezcal. But it's interesting. Apparently there's a tequila surplus growing and low alcohol alternatives also popping up in Mexico. Tell us about these.
Yeah, so I think, tequila is super popular here in mezcal as well, in these margaritas. But I think I'm told that there is a surplus of tequila, which means that more of it is being distilled than is being sold. And the problem is that they can store it in barrels, but it evaporates quite rapidly due to the climate here. I actually didn't realize that tequila can only legally be made in Mexico because the government owns the intellectual property for it. And so it means that they are checking that it's associated with specific regions. It originates from Jalisco, which is the state that I'm currently in.
Oh, so a bit like champagne then, sort of having that sort of trademark on it. Yeah.
Exactly. But there's this threat looming of the 25% tariff on the agave spirit. The agave is the sort of the plant that goes into tequila. And so the US buys 83% of tequila exports. And with this threat looming, smaller tequila brands may struggle to sort of maintain their hold. But, it's interesting to meet with people who are doing something a little bit different. I met with quite a young drinks brand called Oasis. They have made their own brand of what Mexicans called suero, which I imagine you had when you were here. It's a sort of, it's a mixture of sparkling water, lime juice and salt, and it's sort of contains electrolytes, and it's mostly used to stay hydrated and to combat hangovers. But actually, I met with these two brand owners who they have an agricultural sort of farm in Veracruz in the north. And they said that actually they invented this they thought up this brand, as to rehydrate people, but actually they were surprised that people are choosing it as a low alcohol alternative. It's something that they didn't plan for, but something that's actually helped their brand a lot, and they were surprised.
Yeah,
a happy accident. So
great.
It's not, nice to see people coming up with some alternatives, but we'll have to keep an eye on what happens with this tequila because it is a big money maker for Mexico.
Yeah, another casualty perhaps of Trump's tariffs. Well, Claudia Jacob, thank you very much. You're listening to Monocle Radio. Now, it is thankfully Friday, so that also means it's time for Andrew Muller's wry take on the week in news. This is what we learned.
We learned this week of a new school of diplomacy to go alongside such niche disciplines as panda diplomacy, ping-pong diplomacy and elephant diplomacy, all of which are things which have happened. We learned specifically of golf diplomacy. A weirdly satisfying sound effect that. Can I get some general muttered agreement?
Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
Let's have it again. Now we're all having fun. We learned that South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, preparing to visit his US counterpart Donald Trump, had determined to appeal to his host via the medium of golf, a game at which Trump has cheated for many years, winning along the way several prestigious and imaginary honours.
This week, Donald Trump proudly announced that he had won 2 of his own trophies at his very own golf course in a single weekend. Wow.
All the while nobly refusing to allow his focus on the game to be broken by such inane, trivial frivolities as, for example, the ceremonial return of American service personnel killed in a training accident overseas.
Our own president was not present to receive their remains in a ceremony known as the dignified transfer when they arrived at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth filled in for America's commander-in-chief, who chose instead to travel to Miami for a Saudi-funded live golf tournament at his own course.
We learned that, as a consequence of all of the above, President Ramaphosa had enlisted the support of top South African golfists Ernie Els and Retief Goosen, and had bought Trump a big book about golf. Let's have a hefty tome landing on a table with a resonant whump. Sadly, however, it didn't work. Aww. Well, quite. We learned that President Trump had resolved to give his guest a piece of his mind, for we learned that President Trump is not, despite what may have been assumed from his rhetoric and actions, entirely indifferent to the tribulations of poor huddled masses yearning to breathe free, etc. But we learned that with a world of trouble to choose from, Trump found himself moved by, and for some scarcely imaginable reason, white South African farmers, and by golly, he had printouts of newspaper articles to prove the extent of their plight.
Death of people. Death. 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 Horrible death.
We learned, however, when we looked such things up, because we're good like that a President of the United States is arguably venturing onto thin ice when he takes a pop at anyone else's country over violent crime, on the grounds that you are statistically more likely to get shot in New Orleans, St. Louis or Detroit than in Johannesburg, so there's that. Also, in the final quarter of last year, while 6,953 people were murdered in South Africa, a horrendous toll, no doubt, one was a white South African farmer. So we learned, again, for some scarcely imaginable reason, Trump had become strangely fixated on one particular demographic. We learned, however, that though President Ramaphosa was a model of restraint throughout Trump's harangue, which was at one point illustrated with a video of inflammatory monologues by an eccentric opposition politician whose party won a single-finger percentage of the vote at South Africa's most recent election, a chap can only bite his tongue so long.
I'm sorry I don't have a plane to give you.
I wish you did. I take it. I would take it. If your country offered the United States Air Force a plane, I would take it.
Still, future visitors to Trump's White House, should there be any, have now learned that the entry-level bribe is one aeroplane. In literary news, meanwhile. We learned of an exciting slate of holiday reading to which to look forward via a summer supplement in the Chicago Sun-Times, bristling with capsule reviews of new titles by big hitters including Isabel Allende with Tidewater Dreams, apparently her first climate fiction novel, and Min Jin Lee with Nightshade, a riveting tale set in Seoul's underground economy, it says here. We learned swiftly thereafter, however, that clearing space on our bookshelves would be lamentably wasted endeavour, as we learned that neither title nor many of the others enthusiastically blurbed by the Chicago Sun-Times actually exist. Aww. We learned thereby, and earnestly hope others learn therefrom, something of the folly of outsourcing any aspect of journalism whatsoever to AI, which we learned was exactly what some idle hack cranking out copy for a syndication farm had done, without bothering to check whatever twaddle the machine cranked out, still less, actually doing the goddamn assignment like a professional taking elementary pride in their labours. We further learned, and earnestly hope publishers do as well, that though experienced human sub-editors do tend to want paying, they're pretty good at preventing your title from beclowning itself in this fashion.
I think so.
An encomium we reserve the right to retract next time they cut one of our extremely amusing jokes. Still, we learned that the hapless scrivener responsible for the fictional fiction can console himself that he was not the only American rumbled skipping the work this week, as we learned that US Secretary for Homeland Security Kristi Noem should arguably have spent less time shooting puppies and more time boning up on the basics.
So, Secretary Noem, what is habeas corpus? Well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right to...
Let me stop you, ma'am. Habeas corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
Or maybe leaving everything to the machines isn't such a bad idea after all. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller.
Andrew, thank you. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned.
With UBS, you have a truly global partner, incorporating new technologies, innovative approaches, and unexpected opportunities, leading you to insights that help answer the questions that matter, delivered with passion, care, and unmatched expertise. Because it's about rising with the dawn each day, knowing that we can do even better. That's what banking is to us. Not just work, but a craft. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Now, Útil is a Lisbon-based design brand focused on enduring and functional storage furniture made from high-quality materials. Its philosophy of simplifying and focusing on the essential won it a Monocle Design Award this year. And its co-founders, designer Manuel Neto and business strategist Thomas Carvalhas, joined Monocle's Carlota Rebelo in Midori House earlier this month at our spring market in collaboration with Visit Portugal, which moves to Zurich this weekend. Carlota began by asking Manuel where they drew the inspiration for their utilitarian style.
I guess we just look around and see how people live today and pick up inspiration from them and from everyday life. I would say life is changing quite fast, and due to many circumstances, people have been moving more often or living in smaller apartments, but not only. So we kind of imagine how are these apartments, and from big to small, but more in a way of designing furniture that doesn't really stand out immediately, in the sense that we want this furniture to blend in with all your history that you already bring, with all that memorabilia that you have, all the pictures and the small souvenirs. And so this is a furniture that just lives with you in an honest and simple way, I guess.
No, it's amazing because I had a look at your stall here in the market earlier, and you have a proper display that you can see how it will look in place. And it's interesting to hear you describe, that adapts to a person's style, because it really struck to me that sense of adaptability. Also, if you move house, if you upgrade or downgrade, if you change your style, the pieces from Útil will endure all of those changes too, right?
We hope so, yeah.
That's the hope, at least.
Yeah. Yeah.
And do you have a standout product or feature? I know it's almost like asking you to pick a favorite child, but if you had to pick a hero product for people who do not know Útil, what would it be?
The single shelves, they're quite iconic in some way because they're extremely simple and clean, and there's always a use for it due to the way it's intelligently done. But the whole plie system is very smart in the way it's built and how the bends are made, and it breaks a bit the stigma of sheet metal furniture, basically, and that's probably why the plie shelving system is interesting. But also the cagette storage box, it kind of softens the approach or what you expect to have from such a rough and pragmatic material and production method. So we kind of try and humanize a little bit this material and the way these things are done.
Now, tell me a bit more about, the trajectory of Útil as a brand. Started in Lisbon, but clearly has gone beyond the borders of just Portugal. How are you coping, and how are you dealing with, the success and the growing? Do you think part of representing brand Portugal is part of your identity as well?
I wouldn't say so. We are from Portugal, obviously, and we present it as a brand based in Lisbon, but we don't see it as we're not exporting, let's say, Portuguese design, which is something I think doesn't really exist actually. We started in Lisbon, but we always add our eye in abroad. So the German market was a market that was very interested in what we were doing first, But then the US grew a bit, and we started to grow in the US and the UK and Germany, Central Europe mostly. And it was a challenge, actually, because being settled in Lisbon, we don't have an immediate customer base. So we don't see our customer. For a long time, we didn't see our customer face to face. So it was based on small interactions in fairs, etc., that we started to make a picture of what our customer was like. And we had to build the operations so as to endure in an online environment, which is very tough. Customers expect things to be very quick, very responsive, and that's quite a challenge. I think it's happening now. I think we're mainly direct selling at the moment, and that was a challenge.
We didn't really know what it could be, so it was and still is kind of an adventure in the sense that we're all constantly testing and trying new things.
Manuel Amarel Neto and Thomas Carvalhas of the furniture storage brand Util there, in conversation with Monocle's Carlotta Rebello. If you happen to be in Zurich today and tomorrow, why not stop by our annual Baddie Market in collaboration with Visit Portugal to explore some of the best brands Portugal has to offer. We're there all day at Dufourstrasse 90. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. It's 7:52 here in London and 2:52 on Broadway. Time for a roundup of theatre news now. For that, I'm joined in the studio by Matt Wolfe, theatre critic at the International New York Times. Matt, great to have you back. Where are you?
Lovely to be here.
First, yes.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Stephen Sondheim, who sadly is no longer with us, although his work still is. He has a new show, which probably sounds odd since he passed away several years ago, but it's called Here We Are. It was first seen off Broadway a season or two ago, and now it's at the National Theatre with a very, very starry cast: Rory Kinnear, Tracy Bennett, Jane Krakowski, and so on. And it's typically audacious for Sondheim, adapted from two movies by Luis Buñuel, the Spanish-Mexican filmmaker, The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie and The Exterminating Angel. You can probably tell from this already that this is not kind of standard musical theatre fare. And it's quite an audacious act of reclamation, because the people, the director, the book writer, they've had to kind of concoct a finished product out of something that was deliberate, but that was left unfinished because Sondheim died. And so it's a very kind of moving tribute to Sondheim's artistry, but it's also a self-contained piece in and of itself that is very much about a kind of life coming to an end, which of course happened with Sondheim. It's embedded in the material, how you move forward, rushing towards the future, although you don't know whether it's going to be hopeful or grim. So there's a lovely subtext to it, even as it's kind of deliberately satiric, as the Buñuel movies are. So it's not for the musical theatre faint of heart. I think if you're a Sondheim aficionado, you'll have a great time. If not, you might be slightly bemused, but I absolutely adore it.
And the way you've described it sort of immediately makes me think of The Tempest with Shakespeare. Like, he sort of had a feeling it was his last work. There is a sort of bit of a fourth wall break vibe. Is that what's going on here?
Very interesting you say a fourth wall break vibe, because in fact the show does very deliberately do that at one point. It's quite Pirandellian. All of a sudden the lights go up, and what are we doing in a theatre? So it's also, if it's paying homage to where Sondheim's life took shape, which was obviously in a theatrical space, in a theatrical auditorium. And I think it's a remarkably adventuresome piece, characteristic of his work as a whole.
And you've given it 5 stars in your review, so one to watch out for.
Yes.
And next, some ballet.
Yes, you might think, why ballet? But of course, the link between ballet and theatre is kind of ever present. And in this quartet of works by the British choreographer Christopher Wheeldon, we also have a nod to pop music, because one of the 4 pieces is set to some songs by Joni Mitchell. That, I have to say, is the least successful of the pieces. The other 3 are more kind of immediately involving, but each one is very, very different. Christopher Wheeldon has been represented in the theatre with MJ, the Michael Jackson musical, with An American in Paris in Broadway and then in London. And the showpiece of this quartet is the ballet version that he's done of An American in Paris, which is the entire 3rd act. And it's very buoyant. There's not a lot of narrative shape to it. If you don't know the story of An American in Paris, you might not really have any idea what's going on, but you'll still love Bob Crowley's extraordinary sets and the wonderful dancing of Francesca Hayward and Cesar Corellis. But for me, the highlight was actually a duo, the piece number 3, called Us, that was done for the Ballet Boys in 2017. And it's just a kind of paean to male camaraderie, beautifully danced by Joseph Sissons and Matthew Ball, with such incredible intricacy and kind of mutual connection that you can't quite believe it. And all I can say is I hope these two dancers get along in real life, because they certainly seem to on stage.
And now something quite different. Jack Lowden, who many people will know from Slow Horses.
Yes.
He's River, the agent in that. He's going to be Mr. Darcy in the upcoming Netflix Pride and Prejudice. He's in a two-hander, The Fifth Step.
Yes, this is a play that was seen last summer at the Edinburgh Festival. It was about alcoholism, and The Fifth Step is a term from AA. And he plays a character who is trying to kind of progress through the ranks and put his drink sozzle past to one side. We'll hear when he succeed. Theatre goers can find out for themselves. And he has a kind of mentor of sorts in Martin Freeman, who's new to the play. Martin Freeman wasn't in it when it was in Edinburgh. And I think the play is essentially, for me, an acting exercise that gives Loudon an opportunity to really strut his stuff. One of the great things about the British theatre is that when people come to fame on television or screen or whatever, if you've been around for a while, you've seen them on stage before anyone else knew who they were. And that's true with Jack Lowden, who I remember in plays at the Old Vic like Electra a decade or more ago. Now, as you say, he's a TV star and in movies as well. And he is so incredibly charismatic on stage. He kind of vaults into view at Soho Place. The theatre where it's being done is in the round, so he's got to play to all corners of the house. And he's instantly commanding. And really, the production is worth seeing, I think, primarily for him. Martin Freeman is fine, but he's essentially a foil to the Jack Lowden character, and I think Loudon's going to be winning some awards for this performance.
And just very, very briefly, Imelda Staunton on stage with her real-life daughter.
Yes. Yes, you could think, oh, Nepo baby, this is not really the thing, but actually Bessie Carter, Imelda Staunton and Jim Carter's real-life daughter, is a proper actress. She's in Bridgerton. She was in Dear Octopus last year at the National. She plays the starchy Vivi Warren opposite her mother, who was a former brothel keeper, in the play, and she can do it. It's not stunt casting, it's the real thing.
Well, that is good to hear. Matt Wolfe, thank you very much for joining us here on The Globalist. That's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers, Laura Kramer and Chris Chermak, our researcher, Francesca Gilks, and our studio manager, Mariella Bevan. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. The briefing is live at midday London time, and The Globalist returns on Monday. I'm Vincent McAviney. Thank you for tuning in.